Hello and good afternoon, everybody. I think we are up and running. So let me swap layouts and we will go ahead and get started for today. Hey, I see Coniferous Pinecone's here. What's up, Pinecone? How you doing today? Hope your Monday is going well. Let me turn on some background music while I sort of overview what we're going to be talking about today for the jam stream. I put together a real simple beat while I was getting everything loaded up. So I'm just going to put that in the background while I talk through some stuff. So for today's jam stream, we have a pretty similar setup to what we normally do. I've got the loop hooked up, everything plugged in. I do have Synthesizer Kun hooked in as well, but because I have boost on, I have it turned off for the moment. But when we get to BGM, I'll turn it back on and then make sure I adjust everything. I did learn something last week that hopefully will help recording. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference for the jam streams, but I adjusted an internal system setting on the loop for the noise floor, and hopefully that cuts the amount of recording distortion I get from the auxiliary inputs, which is how the synth is hooked up to the loop station. Again, you probably won't be able to tell too much on the stream, but for the stuff that I record, hopefully it'll cut down on the amount of noise and static that comes in. Looking around on Google and just kind of looking at people who've been using this hardware for a while, it seems like the feedback from external or aux sources happens no matter what, but if you adjust the noise floor to screen some of that out, then it'll not be quite as noticeable, and hopefully it won't be audible in the tracks at all. So as I record some more stuff, I'll be doing a bit of monitoring to make sure, because having that feedback show up on my recorded tracks that I actually release is not good. I don't like that, and I've been trying to reduce it as much as possible because it's not very professional sounding. So what are we going to be doing today on the jam stream? Well, we'll start with some warm-ups to sort of get the blood flowing just like we normally do. Run through some practice beats just to get everything kind of warmed up. And then for sound theory and technique discussion, I did sort of prepare something I wanted to talk about today, and I'll have to see if I can figure out how to set it up with the loop. But there's some specific type of training and practice techniques I wanted to talk about today for beatboxing. Normally I kind of just ramble and talk through whatever I kind of feel like, but today I want to focus in on the aspect of speed. And so we'll get there once we get past warm up and everything else, but that'll be the focus of discussion for technique and sound theory. We'll do that for a bit, maybe apply that to some real world beats and whatnot. And then depending on how long that takes and how in-depth that discussion goes, whatever time comes after that will be for brainstorming BGM beats and putting ideas together for future release stuff, which is always productive, especially when people in the chat are throwing ideas at me. And so that'll be roughly the game plan for today, and then we'll see what comes out of the discussion. All right, let me clear this off. Kind of a simple background beat that I put together just before the stream. I kind of like it, even though it's simple and I don't know what I'd really do with it. But I think we could probably replicate something like that later if we really needed to. It's not hard. It's just a few notes on a bass line and a couple chords on a higher synth line. So go ahead and clear that. And we will work on some warm-up stuff. Like we've done in the past, the intro warm-up stuff is also a good way for me to sound check to make sure audio sounds good. So if I need to change anything with the audio settings or tweak stuff, I always say, let me know in the chat and I can adjust stuff on the fly and make sure things don't sound terrible. Hey, Sour Lad's here. What's going on, Sour Lad? How are you doing today? Well, welcome to the Jam Stream. We are getting ready to run through some warm-up. A little bit of pre-beat calisthenics to get the blood flowing, and then we will jump straight into practice. So with that said, let's get started. All right. Oh, I did see Sour Lad said doing great, and you guys? I'm doing all right. It has been a decently productive weekend. I'm still not too thrilled about my car situation, but I can't really do much about it. At least not until my shop vac shows up later in the week. Oh, I see Vera's here, Crusher's here, Iconic's here. What's happening, folks? How's everybody doing today? Vera asked what happened to your car. Oh, I put it in the community Discord a couple days ago. But basically, what happened was I was driving home. This is a story for anyone else who hasn't heard it too. I was driving home with a brand new tomato plant in my car, and I had it transplanted into a large pot because it's big plant. And as I was driving home before I got back to where I live, the pot tipped over and spilled about half the soil and the plant in the back seat of my car, and covered everything with a mix of soil and manure and snapped the plant. So my car is currently full of soil, and I don't have a way to get rid of it until like a shop vac I bought on Amazon shows up later in the week. So not catastrophic, but it sucks because my car's a mess right now. And I think the plant's going to be all right. I was telling folks in the Discord, I have it tied up and it didn't sever, just snapped like right at the base, which is not great, but hopefully it'll be all right. And I'll be happy when I can clean my car out. So it's just covered in dirt in the back seat. I drive a little car, and I don't normally drive people around, but it does suck because I like to keep my car clean. First world problems, I know, but anyway, hopefully by next weekend I'll have it cleaned out. But yes, welcome folks. Hopefully your Monday is going well. I know for folks that live here in the States, it's a holiday. Today is Juneteenth. I don't know if other countries really observe that one since it's kind of a new holiday, but happy Juneteenth to everybody. Let me change the title. We'll go into practice and sound theory. And we'll leave that there for a bit. So to kind of transition from warm up into discussion of beatbox technique / sound theory, like I mentioned right at the top of the stream when we were just starting out, depending on what kind of ideas I get throughout the week before I do one of these streams, sometimes I'll prepare kind of like a more structured idea or schedule of what I want to talk about, and other times I'll have an idea and I'll just wing it. I don't script things. I don't have like a cue card or whatnot. I don't have that much foresight to prepare stuff. I just have a general idea of what I want to talk about and bring that as a series of discussion points for everyone here as we are hanging out on the jam streams. So we're going to be discussing some methods for practicing when it comes to beatboxing. And the whole point of the discussion today is something I know we've touched on, and it's not a new topic by any means, but the idea of speed. And kind of, it'll be an interesting discussion since I haven't really talked about this in depth, but when it comes to speed of technique and sounds in beatboxing, not just talking about technicality, that's a little bit different. We're going to talk about speed in general when it comes to general techniques and sounds in the kit, which has some sort of overlap with the techniques for technicality, but hopefully it'll be kind of an interesting look at just the grind and how the grind kind of flows into developing the sound set. And hopefully, let me see if I can find my metronome real quick, since I want to use that as a way to sort of illustrate for everyone in the chat how you kind of drill and practice for speed, at least as I've learned. So let me figure out where the metronome is again. There it is. Okay, this should be moderately loud. I actually don't know what controls the bass volume of this thing. But I'm going to use this as a sort of assistance tool when I get there. Let me see. Is this BPM? Oh, no, that's just... I think this is the volume. Okay, we'll keep it low. Can you all hear the metronome? I think for BPM, we'll need to adjust it here. There we go. Yeah, okay. I don't want it to be too loud, especially with the chime. It'll be deafening in your ears. Let's put it up to 90. Okay. All right, that's there. It's good. I'll save this so I can use it later. So when it comes to speed of technique in beatboxing, again, very similar to how we've explained technicality in practicing, where you're taking the sound sets and creating combos and chains and learning to do them consistently and then eventually quickly. You know, in the technicality realm, we talk about the TKK, and how you learn the on their own, or you do them on their own and start putting them together into chains until you take that triplet, get faster and more clean and consistent with it, and then the speed comes naturally as you just practice the sound over and over again. And instead of it being 1, 2, 3 with the it becomes 1, 2, 3, and then the more you practice it, it becomes a more seamless set of triplets, and that's how you go from this to the and learning how to speed chain it with other sounds, and create the looping combos and the longer, faster sequences of combo chains. Right? We talked about that a lot. So the idea of practicing sounds for consistency and speed can be applied to all the other sounds in beatboxing, really, from a simple kick drum to what we're going to probably spend the most time, at least I hope, how it applies to snares. And so to kind of explain where I got this idea to talk about today, I saw a short from real well-known OG in the scene for beatboxing, a dude from, I think he's from Singapore, or Indonesia somewhere. His name is Darny. He's a real well-known guy. He's been in the scene forever, and he's an insanely talented beatboxer. He had this challenge with a bunch of his friends, kind of like in a TikTok format, where they were trying to see how many snares they could do in several seconds. And I thought it was really interesting because I didn't really give a lot of thought to practicing just rapid fire snares, because I don't really do that in a lot of beats. But for example, the one that I saw that I thought was really interesting was a PF snare speed challenge. Oh, I see Crusher's going into lurk. I don't think I have lurk as a command, but that's okay. Feel free to lurk. We'll be here talking about random beatboxing stuff, so no worries. And so this challenge that Darny and a couple of his beatbox friends did was a rapid fire PF snare challenge. And so for general context and explaining, the PF snare is one that sounds like kind of a muted snare head hit on a snare drum. You have like the regular, which is more the impact sharper PF, which sounds like the, or we have the no lungs, mouth pressure only lower, what I call like a muted or a low PF snare, which sounds like, so you have, or low, just drops in pitch and is a little bit softer. So you have different variations of the PF snare. It's one of the elementary snare types that people usually learn. One of the ones I recommend people learn when they're first getting into beatboxing, because it doesn't require any specific lung control. It doesn't require any strong muscle memory. It's a little bit of an unusual motion to go through when you're learning, but once you learn it, you just have to practice it to get it clean. And it's a very useful tool. I like the PF snare a lot. So Darnie and his friends were doing a rapid fire PF challenge to see how many people could do it in a certain amount of seconds. And I thought that was really interesting because I can't do PF snares really quickly. I think if I could probably do quarter notes just on a 1, 2, 3, 4 cleanly. And if I go faster than that, it gets really muddy and it falls apart and it doesn't sound good. So if let's see, set up the metronome and let me go up to 120. Okay. So let me illustrate what I'm talking about when it comes to doing the sound in sequence, and I'll explain what I thought was interesting with Darnie's short that he did. So we're following, this is again 120 BPM on the metronome, and do 1, 2, 3, 4 quarter notes of the PF snare. And again, this is a really good way to practice too with the metronome because it trains you to follow and stay on beat. And if you don't have a music background like me, and you're especially not a percussion background, being able to keep time and stay on meter is really important for beatboxing, because without that, you can't construct consistent and good sounding beats. So we're following a simple 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Doing essentially quarter note PF snares would sound like 3, 4. And it's just following the clicks essentially on the metronome. And let me turn it off for a sec. And so just the idea of for like a prolonged repetition or cycle, just doing them. It might sound simple, but doing that and just practicing that consistency, one, again, using a metronome trains your brain to get used to the idea of keeping on a specific time or a meter, which is great for consistency. But also, it's teaching you consistency of getting the sound to come out, because you want each PF snare to sound the same. You don't want the sound itself to have a lot of variation unless you're intentionally trying to change the sound. So just doing the over and over again, while it may sound elementary, it's training your brain and your muscle memory to be consistent and give you more mastery over the sound. Hey, Edward's here. What's up, Edward? How are you doing today? Welcome to the Jam Stream. We were talking about practice methods and tools for training for speed. So to recap a little bit, in this short that I saw from Darnie, he and his friends were doing this same sound, the PF snare, and seeing how many they could do or how fast they could do it in a certain amount of seconds before essentially stopping. And one of his friends was able to do it, maybe I would say 8th notes or close to 16th notes. And it was impressive. I can't do that sound very quickly. If I try and force a PF snare quickly as fast as possible, it would sound like, which is eighths, essentially 8th notes, and it's very, very kind of muddy and not very well defined. You can hear it, but it sounds kind of like it's blending together into a bit of a mush, and doesn't sound super clean. One of the other guys was able to do kind of like rapid quarter notes and still keep the pattern together. And then Darnie gets on the mic for his part of the challenge, and he does like 30-second notes, machine gun rapid fire PF snares. And I've never seen that before, and it was pretty impressive. And it you could still make this sound out. It didn't just sound like, a mush. You could definitely tell he was doing PF snares that fast. And so I thought that would be an interesting topic to sort of discuss on the jam streams when it comes to adapting the training techniques to, again, get your anatomy used to speed. And so that's how I've kind of set everything up today as far as discussing how that works with different parts of the instruments in beatboxing. We'll probably focus on snares, but maybe I'll talk a little bit about how that works with kicks, since it's the same idea. Hats are a little bit fundamentally different, but it's the same idea. So maybe we'll take a couple different examples and then try and apply that here. So let's see. Let me drop this back down to 90. And we're going to do this as an example, just for the chat, with the metronome to kind of show, okay, here's how you go from being able to do things in a vacuum, more or less, to being able to do them at high speeds, like a pro out in the scene like Darnie. And I'm not really an expert on explaining training with a metronome. I don't do it a ton, but I have used it in the past. And some of the teachers that I've studied under really recommend, especially for beginners, getting a real simple metronome app or something similar to just help you keep time. And I think it's the Brenner one is one I have on my phone. It's free. You don't have to pay for it. And it allows you to set up a click track on a metronome at different time signatures. So if you want to do something really weird, like a 3/4 or like a 5/6 or something else, or 6/8, then you could set it up that way, and then you could practice keeping time with the different types of beats. And that's something I need to do more. I don't know if this one on this, I'm using the metronome on the loop station. So if we turn it on at 90, this is 90.0, 90 beats per minute. And we'll use this as a sort of our example, and then maybe I'll adjust it if necessary. But again, if you're just starting out and learning how to do all of the, let's focus on snares, so snare type sounds consistently, and you want to start practicing for speed, then pairing with a metronome just in the beginning as you're learning the sounds is going to help you get better at them. And then you can start ramping up the speed of the metronome to, again, practice doing them faster. So this is going to be a kind of a, maybe more of an elementary example, but any level of beatboxing or beatboxer can benefit from this type of practice. I should do it more often. In fact, maybe I will start forcing myself to devote some time to practicing this way, because I can always improve on consistency and keeping time and whatnot. So let's run through it with a couple different snare types, and then we'll see where it goes from there. So if we're doing it on the track, on the clicks for quarter notes, PF snare, the pff, and maybe we'll do like an 8 repetition or something like that. But just keeping time, it would sound like 3, 4. And, in practice, you just be doing this for maybe 5 to 10 minutes straight, as long as you can without stopping. And again, sounds very simple and basic, but the idea of sticking to the beat, keeping that metronome, or keeping up with the metronome, and kind of forcing your brain to follow a beat will help develop the sound long term. And it will, believe it or not, build muscle endurance. Because doing just the non-stop, quote unquote non-stop, will put more strain on your muscles than if you're just doing, one snare here or there in a beat that you're putting together for a pattern. And so, again, training consistency, training endurance, and then also training timekeeping, staying on time and on meter. And so taking that idea, let's, before we start changing speeds, we'll do sort of everything on the ground floor with several different snares. Let's do at least 3. Let's do inward K next. The same idea, but thinking about it from a practice perspective, it's a different technique. So you have the PF snare, the inward K snare rather. You have to follow the same exercise. I'm going to do it to the same rhythm or same time as before, but it's a different technique. So therefore the training and practice is a different subset of the muscles and mouth anatomy, as it were. And so same thing, 4 count. 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And just doing that over and over and over again. Oh, and we gotta hydrate from Iconic. I'll drink more of my smoothie, finishing my lunch. And so inward K, I would say it doesn't put a ton of stress on any of your anatomy because it doesn't force pressure anywhere on lips or really anything. But one of the tricky parts, I guess it does exert some force on your tongue since that's what's creating that. One thing that is unique to this particular sound, if you're doing this sort of training, is because you're breathing in slightly to get the inwards K noise to pop, which is how you're getting a. You're taking in a little bit of air each time. And so if you're doing this, let's say like 16 total, just on the beat, you are breathing in constantly, and unless you pause mid-count, which might screw your rhythm up, you are going to continue to breathe in until your lungs are full, and you'll have to breathe out. And so this is sort of a way for you to train your lungs with this particular sound because it involves breathing inwards. And so if I was doing just the by the time I hit to number about 16, I'm getting close to a limit where I have to breathe out because my lungs are essentially full, just breathing in each time you hit the snare. And that's also decent training for lung capacity in a way, which is something I should probably research a little bit more so I can talk about it with, a bit more confidence. But just like in wind instrument playing, in singing, anything that involves lungs as a way to power whatever you're doing. Beatboxing works the same way. I'll turn this off for a second. Beatboxing works the same way because your lung capacity primarily just drives how long you can beatbox and create beats without running out of air and having to breathe again. And so training to increase that capacity and get your lungs used to being full, empty, and having control over, all that air in your system is also pretty important for, I guess, sustainment in beatboxing. Because, if you're doing a really complicated beat and you're not metering how you're breathing or structuring the sound so that you're regulating your air, you're going to run out of air or take in too much, and you'll have to stop and physically break the beat, which can be a little bit disruptive when you're creating a pattern. So you might see something in kind of more of an advanced technique for beatboxing, I would say, where someone is creating a really simple rhythm, and then they have maybe a technicality or a snare combination in the middle that's going to get them that air without having to stop and breathe. So let's say we're doing kind of like a more drum and bass sound. Let me see if I can illustrate this properly and make it make sense. So let's say we're doing something like pretty simple 1-2 1-2 drum and bass adjacent beat. You can kind of regulate and equalize air just by breathing out with the kicks rather, not the snares. This is an inward K snare for that particular example. But you can kind of equalize your intake and output of air by just using the kicks and then breathing in with the snare, the inward K snare, and keep it more or less equal. But if you were doing a more complicated rhythm that's not just the kick and the snare, it's going to take up more of your air and start depleting it faster than you're going to be taking it in. Let me see if I can flesh that idea out. So instead of just what if you're doing additional hat runs in between, or like a mini technicality pattern as part of the beat instead of just the kick and the snare? So it might be and so I could tell just because I did it really subtly as I was doing the beat. even doing the a little hat runs in between the snare and the kick, it's not really depleting the air faster than my inwards K breathes it in. So I actually took a microsecond to breathe out as I was doing that example, just at at full speed. And part of regulating your air is being able to do that, but also trying to structure things in a way so you don't have to do that as often and as little as possible, because then it disrupts what you're doing. But if we were to add in another layer to that beat, where let's say we're doing a bass sound, which is going to require air. If we're doing like a throat bass, air is going to be leaving and breathing out as you're doing the sound. And maybe I could do it with an inward K for the example and see how it works. But if we take the beat, throw in bass, and then see how it sort of changes how you have to regulate air, that might be a good way to show what I'm trying to explain here. So let's say we take the okay. So just with that occasional, really brief bass hit in between, that equalizes the intake and the output pretty closely. So for that entire stretch I just did an example with the little bass line in there, I didn't breathe in or out once. The only time I'm breathing, at all is to do the because it requires a little bit of air to come in. But in doing all of the other sounds, the kick, anything else, and then the bass, it's roughly equalizing intake and output so I don't have to breathe. And so talking about practice, this is a little bit off topic, and we'll get back into the idea of speed in a sec. But figuring out a way to sort of equalize what you're doing basically means under enough practice and control, you can essentially just beatbox forever. I could probably keep doing that same pattern just repeated over and over and over again for a while. Like, I don't train that way, and maybe I should, just to force my lungs to get used to that regulation concept more. But I could do that for a while without having to physically stop and breathe, because again, I'm essentially intaking as much air as I'm outputting, and it's roughly equalized at a zero total. As soon as it starts to skew in one way or another when it comes to creating beats towards either too much intake or too much output, then that directly drives when you have to stop and breathe, either to breathe out and expel extra air, or to stop and breathe in and replenish air so you don't pass out on your feet. And so the idea of air regulation, that's something I should think about, because it's pretty important, and it's not something I spend a lot of time studying or thinking about just for me. But for people who want to get into beatboxing and want to learn and kind of want to see how, from a mechanical perspective, all this stuff works, maybe I'll see if I can put that on the docket for future jam streams to talk about kind of airflow regulation techniques and methods to do that, since there's some I can think of that, again, try and keep your air supply roughly leveled out so that you're not running out of air and you're not running over with a surplus. I'll think about that for the future. That could be an interesting topic of discussion. We talk about different intake strategies in addition to just stopping and breathing in. Doing something like a inward K is a short little bit of air. You can slightly extend out the sound of the inward K so that it's not just a sharp sound, more of a prolonged, like a basically kind of like a, what does that remind me of? Almost like a when you're dragging something across a snare as instead of just a sharp hit. Not a great example. I'm not a musician, but a prolonged snare instead of a. I guess my beatboxing intro sound that I always do, that's an elongated inward K snare that instead of a short cutoff one. And so again, for the reason why I bring it up is taking in more air than just a short, concise hit. So there's changing the sound of snares when it comes to the way they're being generated to, again, either bring in more air or try to think of an example where you would change the sound to expel more air. It doesn't really work that way in reverse, now that I'm thinking about it. Another technique that I don't do a lot, and I probably should practice more, is inward drags, which is creating a distorted air pathway using usually your tongue and your mouth as you're breathing in, and mixing that in with other sounds to, again, you're bringing in more air, usually in tandem with some sort of technique that's causing you to throw a lot of air out. I could think of maybe like a vocalized chest bass or something that requires a ton of air. And so doing an inward drag, and I'll demonstrate in a sec, doing an inward drag as part of the pattern and rhythm will be a way to sort of make up for the fact that you're releasing a lot of air by giving you more, and it's also an actual sound. So an inward drag sounds like very simple. I think I've explained this one a while back, but it's basically just taking your tongue to the roof of your mouth, not sealing it, not sticking it there, but just putting it in the path of the airway, and then breathing in and then putting your teeth, your top row of teeth, lightly on your lip to sort of cut the sound off. So you're kind of saying like a HF sound inwards. So, and again, I'll get into the mechanics if people want, but for the sake of explaining why I'm talking about this now, inward drag as a way to get more air in conjunction with another beat will be something like maybe something dubstep-ish. So and sounds, again, relatively simple, but if you were doing some sort of really strong outwards vocalized or unvocalized, any sort of outwards bass sound, which is going to be emptying your lungs, having the inward drags as part of the rhythm, it's essentially filling the role of a hat. Okay, so which could sound like kind of like a record scratch or something like that. It's a distortion sound functioning kind of like a hat in between the kicks and snares, but it's giving you a way to get a lot of the air in on rhythm, and it's creating a sound. So it fulfills two purposes there. Pretty handy, and you can do a lot with inward drags. I think the closest thing that I do consistently to that would be like a sucker punch drag, which is the part of my intro sound I always do. That's the which is basically hips, sips, and a sucker punch. So the sucker punch is where you're breathing in through your mouth and you're sealing your tongue to the roof of your mouth at the same time to cut the airflow off, and it creates that kind of like reverse punch noise. Pretty handy sound. Takes a bit of practice to get it to be audibly sharp and noticeable, but does hit decently on a mic too. So the sucker punch drag takes and combines it with a hip, like a basically saying hip inwards, just breathing in without any vocalization. And it's like I haven't broken this sound down in a while, so I'm trying to think how to explain it correctly. But it's like a series of the hip, quote unquote, hip noises, and everything breathing in. All of it is inwards, and you're just doing it in a triplet pattern in like a roll. That's how you're getting them. And anyway, that's also a way to bring in air, because that entire pattern of noises, as in addition to fulfilling the role of plugging in like a technicality chain, essentially, it's giving you more air. And it works pretty good as a kind of like a drum fill type function, which we've talked about when it comes to slotting in technicality. But if I'm doing a really fast beat, and I might add in as a filler sequence of noises the 1 2 3, or 1 2 3 1 2 3, so 6. Let me just demonstrate. It'll make more sense. So if we're doing something like so without getting too wacky with it, every time you're hearing the, it's slotted in as seamlessly as possible, but it's serving as a way to get little bits of air in while creating sounds. So, not to drive the point in the ground, but air regulation, pretty expansive topic. So we'll kind of shelve that one for now, and maybe in a future jam stream, I'll come back and talk about that one a little bit, because I think we could probably have some good discussion on ways to approach air regulation and how all the different sounds and whatnot fit together in beatboxing to give yourself more tools. And again, I didn't really think about that, but it's a good sort of sidebar to go down. Well, anyway, to circle back to the original topic of practice, speed and consistency when it comes to snares. So let's turn the metronome on, and I'll just kind of reiterate what I was talking about, and then we'll move on to maybe one more example, a more difficult example. So for inward K, if we turn on the metronome, and we're basically doing quarter notes to start. On beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Seems like 16 is about my limit with how much air I normally get. You tell that last one was very faint, almost didn't come out at all. So doing it on the beat for quarters, looks like I can do about 16 before I have to stop and get rid of the air. I think you could probably fine tune the sound to draw less air if you just force your muscle memory to get used to doing that. So instead of maybe more of a, shorten the burst down a little bit so that you can maybe try and force out a few more repetitions before your lungs are full and you got to expel all the extra air. So that's an interesting idea. I'll have to think about that. But if we take the BPM on the metronome and let's go up to 120. Well, that'll make it easier if I do it this way. There we go. Same exercise, but again, following the beat at 120, doing the inward K, practicing at a higher speed, would sound like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hits about the same limit because I'm doing the sound the same way as before, just a little bit faster. Hit about 16 and lungs are full. And so, again, the idea of incrementally taking the sound, ramping up the speed slowly over time, and then forcing yourself to practice over and over again. You probably do thousands of snares in a practice session, but as you do that, you'll be getting better, more consistent, and again, getting used to keeping time with a beat as it goes faster. If we go up to 150, and you could do this without changing the rhythm of the metronome too. You can basically be doing double time on whatever it's doing. This is a little bit easier for my brain to sort of adapt to because I'm following the click. So again, this is the third level of training. 150. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, what is that, like 14? Remember, might have been just shy of 16. But again, you're moving up faster. Sounds are much closer together, but you're trying to practice staying on beat and staying consistent. So I like doing this in 30 beats per minute increments. It doesn't really matter. You could stay on 90 and practice that for a week. And I bet if you did that, for anybody who's actively learning beatboxing, if you stick to, let's say, 90 beats per minute on a metronome and you just do snares for 10 or 15 minutes, as long as possible and as consistent as possible, if you took stock of what your sound sounded like on day 1 and at the end of the week at day 7, I guarantee you'll see a difference. As you get more used to making sounds and beatboxing and whatnot, you'll probably see less of an improvement. You know, it's not gonna be dramatic, but you will see improvement. It just, the practice, even 10 to 15 minutes of doing just that type of drill per day will allow you to get better. Let's try 180. 180 might be pushing it for my speed. So now we're jumping up pretty fast. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's try it. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 12. I think I am subconsciously bringing more air in the faster I go, because the last one I got to like 13 and had to stop. This one I barely got to 12 and had to stop. So that tells me the faster I go, the more air I'm bringing in on that particular type of snare. Interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. But if we go up like another 30 to 210, this is the last one, and then we'll try this same example with one more snare, and then that should kind of wrap us up for the kind of sound theory and practice discussion. This is 210 beats per minute. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty fast. Let's see if I can keep up and how many I do. 2, 3, 4. 1. That was more than, that was like 20, like 22 total repetitions. So I think I intentionally cut my air off a little bit, so I didn't bring in as much as before. That's weird. Maybe it's just because it's so much faster, but that's pretty fast. I don't think I could do that for a long time. So maybe I should practice at 210. So let's ratchet it back down to 90, and we'll illustrate this, maybe not at length. Again, I don't want to just repeat myself over and over again. But back at 90. 1, 2. Let's do this with BGM, spit snare. Probably the toughest one to do quickly of the ones that I know, without cheating, and I'll explain what that means in a sec. So I gotta be careful, because this snare hits the mic really hard, so I need to like not point directly at my mic source here. I kind of point down a bit, but BGM snare sounds like even that direction is still hitting pretty hard on the mic. So let me try and do this without blowing everybody's eardrums out. So the BGM, doing this one quickly, and I didn't see Narni and his friends do it for this one. I'm sure that they'll do it at some point, but this one for speed is tough because it requires a lot of muscle control, not a lot of air. In fact, you can do it without even breathing if you're doing a non-breath spit snare, but fast. Again, I'll explain what cheating means in a sec, but taking the same example on a 90 beats per minute, it sound like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This one may take the most air of the 3 that we've looked at so far, because it requires a lot of force to get that sharp spit snare sound to come out even at all. But you have to reset your lips in a way as you're getting prepared to do another burst. So just doing the motion for the BGM or spit snare is more effort. I think that's what I'm getting at. It's more effort to do per sound. So trying to ramp this one up is going to yield some interesting effects. So let's just do it quickly and see, how it works. I've never trained this one for speed either. But we go from 90 to 120 and try 1, 2, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to take back what I said. I think this one takes a little less air, but more exertion on your mouth because it's lip strength for this one to get it crisp and to kind of cut down and clamp down to get the sound. So I'm not really using a ton of air because it's little bursts, but I'm having to do like these really forceful clamps on each snare each time you hear it, which will tire your lips out. It's pretty good endurance training as well. But at 120, that's not too bad. If we go up to 150, now we're picking up speed a little bit. This one, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's tougher to do. This one, I feel like it's lip endurance a little bit more than air regulation just for this particular type of snare. But I could feel between like the halfway point and towards the end, it's starting to lose its sharpness because it's doing it in a vacuum. So I have a pretty decent BGM snare, but the more I do it and as my lips get tired, it starts to lose its impact. It's not quite as sharp. And so if we try this at 180, we're probably going to see that fall off a lot faster. This is probably getting close to my limit. I cannot do this sound very fast. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, right about halfway through that entire sort of sequence, I could feel like my lips just burning. It's actually physically sore because my endurance isn't trained this way. So I think I'm going to have to practice doing it this way. Just one, it'll improve my sound, and two, it'll improve lip strength and endurance. It's interesting. You guys are seeing me learn in real time what my speed capability is. I didn't practice this beforehand. Let's try 210. So this is pretty quick. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I lose the ability to do that much faster. Like three repetitions essentially. And so that's pretty interesting. For the BGM snare, that's probably the toughest one I do regularly to do at speed. Cough snare would be tough too. Doing that fast would be interesting. I don't think I see people do rapid cough snares. Another one that we won't do for the example because it'll just take longer, but the outwards K and that would be a good one to practice as well, because doing that one really quickly is an entirely different set of muscles than any of the ones we've done so far, like the main four that I do regularly. But the BGM snare one, that's probably the one that requires the most physical training because of the stress it puts on your lips. And so before we move on, when I say you have to practice these without cheating, so I could do a rapid BGM snare run that doesn't involve resetting and doing the sound over and over again. Instead, it's using my tongue to break up the airflow and like a sharp, I think it's staccato tonguing if you're playing a wind instrument. So instead of, which is one snare, one snare, one snare, one snare, it's one continuous airflow, and then I'm breaking up the sound of my tongue instead of my lips. So like a speed, the speed BGM snare run I'm talking about sounds like, and that's the sound, a prolonged sound, but it's being interrupted by my tongue instead of my lips cutting it off each time. And so that's a different way to practice speed, and it's kind of a cool variant on the sound itself, but that's not the same as what we were doing before, where it's, because I could do that with using the same method of interrupting the airflow with my tongue, and it would sound like a little bit less clean because you're having to basically create the sound and then stop it with your tongue at a rhythm. It's much easier to do it fast than it is slow, which is how you're getting the. And so I think it's just another method or a variation on the technique to practice. But it's good to know that, where I stand as far as speed, this will be a good thing for the archives, so that, if I start practicing on and off or even consistently with speed and training, we do this again in, let's say, 2 months, and we compare. Okay, I was pretty much stuck at 210, barely 210 for BGM. After practicing it, am I faster? Or the same thing for PFs or inward K or outward K, any snare. What's the progression been after practicing? And hopefully there's a progression. I can't go backwards. That would be really bad. And so, again, a bit longer discussion on the technique and sound theory, but when it comes to beatbox technique and practicing, again, I'll keep drilling the point home because one of my teachers really mentioned it a lot, and to his point, he was right. Metronome training for all levels of skill is always beneficial, and I should do it more since it's not hard. You can, again, free apps. You can get free metronome apps on your smartphone, and it's just there. And teaching yourself to stay on time, stay on meter, and then getting consistent with techniques is very handy. It's all sort of part of the basic, structure, fundamentals. It's like in any sort of skill. You got to get good at walking before you can get good at running. You could start running, but it's going to be tougher because you won't have the basics underneath. Anyway, I've talked about that in the past. Probably not new. So let me see. Let us move on to BGM brainstorming. I want to spend some time kicking around ideas for BGM tracks for the remainder of our time today on the Jam Stream. So before I forget again, let me change my caption. Okay. Now for BGM brainstorming, like I mentioned before, I have Synthesizer Kun hooked up, so let me turn on the device. Hopefully that didn't peak super loud. If we do a bass volume check. I think I like this setup with the synthesizer up on these empty box crates that I have here. It gets a little bit closer, so I don't have to look down as much, but it boxes me into my space a little bit. But it'll work pretty well for what we're doing here. Now, as we brainstorm ideas for BGM with the synthesizer, I'm going to have to turn my boosts on and off like I've done before, because when it's on, you could probably hear it on the actual broadcast itself, but if I hit one key, you could hear some fuzz, some distortion on it. And that's because my mic boosts that I need to beatbox are boosting the sound of the synthesizer that's coming in via aux. So again, now that I know that's a big problem, we shouldn't have the issues that we did on last year's Halloween project, which is the first one to use the synthesizer. And there was some fuzz on a lot of tracks. I managed to reduce it on a lot of them, but it's still there, and irritates me every time I listen to that particular release because I like the songs, but the distortion is a little bit distracting. With the changes I made to the system sound settings and the noise floor, without the boosts on, it should be pretty minimal. So if I'm plugging in instruments when I have my boosts off from the synth and you can hear a lot of distortion, let me know if it's picking up so that I can try and tweak things. Otherwise, when I record it, it's going to have that same fuzz, and I don't want that. So let's start. I had an idea before the stream last night as I was trying to come up with what I wanted to talk about today. I want to do a drum and bass track. I haven't done drum and bass in a bit, and we're using it in some examples earlier on. So I want us to lay down some rhythms for a drum and bass type beat. So let's start with that. I'm going to turn my boosts off. Maybe I'll do at least 3 tracks worth of recording, and then I'll turn everything back on and we'll kind of discuss what we've put together. And again, for everyone hanging out in the chat, as we start developing things, if you have ideas or suggestions or just anything that comes to you regarding the BGM track, just throw out whatever ideas you got. There's no such thing as a stupid idea here, because this whole process is really kind of experimental and meant to be collaborative with all of you. And a lot of you folks that hang out here that have given me ideas have shaped a lot of the tracks that I've put together. And also the naming. So I usually ask at the end for people to give me suggestions for what to call these so I can write them down. But as we're constructing the different tracks, keep in mind the ideas you might have for titles, because that is, again, part of the collaborative process. And you can tell all your friends when stuff comes out on Spotify that, hey, I named that one track on a stream that this one goofy VTuber did. Your claim to fame. Yeah, I can't pay you for it though. All right, so let's work on a couple basic skeletons for a drum and bass track and see where it goes. All right. Let us come back for a minute and discuss what we have so far. Let me reset my mic settings here so I'm not deafeningly loud. But this should be good enough so that I can at least talk. Doesn't need to be perfect. And you'll be getting a bit of audible distortion from the synth since it's plugged in. But this one, okay, I don't think this one is completely done, but it's got 3 basic tracks that we set up just in noodling around here. We've got a rhythm line, again, keeping it pretty standard drum and bass fare, a moving bass line, and then a synth line for the high to mid. And it ended up kind of coming together as a bit more of a kind of darker sound, which wasn't my goal, but kind of interesting. It sounds high energy, but a bit more ominous, which is definitely something I'm going to need for some future releases that I'm doing. Iconic says, only name suggestion I got at the moment is Satellite Strobe. That is pretty applicable, especially because, our good friend, the Slicer Effect, which I think for the purposes of today, I'm only going to do that on this track, unless a really interesting idea hits me, because especially for the electronic, techno-ish type sounds, I don't want to use Slicer too much. I've already used it on a lot of different things, but it's such a fun effect. If we take a listen to the synth line, that interrupting signal type noise you hear on the synth line is being caused by the Slicer, and it does it so perfectly well with just the simple one note interrupt that it can really kind of alter how something comes across. I like it a lot, but again, I don't want to use it too much. Let me save my work. It would be incredibly bad for me to mistakenly delete my stuff like I've done in the past. It's always quite embarrassing when that happens. So what we've got here, again, it's fairly basic combination of ideas put together. I think there needs to be some sort of complementary instrument. This is again where the brainstorming comes in for everybody here hanging out in chat. We have what sounds like kind of like a basic keyboard synth, essentially. I used a combination of what this synthesizer calls square lead and synth lead. Square lead sounds like, again, it's going to be fuzzy because of my mic boost. Don't worry, I'll turn it off before recording anything. But that's what the square lead sounds like. And then I used saw lead, which sounds like very similar. This one has kind of more of like a brassy-ish sound to it. But when run through the Slicer, which I could illustrate here on a different track, just like we heard on the, actually, I need to remember that it's going to do it to my mic too. So that cut up interrupting sound from the Slicer is applying to these pretty basic higher synths, and it's cutting it up to get the one we have looping here, which is I used a very similar note progression as I did with the bass. It's not identical, but the first 2 notes stay high, and then it loops back to follow the same notes as the bass as it goes back down to the, let's see. There we go. So that part is the same as the bass. The bass starts much lower. There we go. I remember which notes I put in. The bass goes. Real simple. It goes up, goes back down in the same steps. The high synth starts high, and then comes back down. Same progression, just higher up in octave. So I didn't really want to create like a conflicting melody there. I just did a slight variation on the same note progression, and that's how you're getting the bass plus the lead, the synth lead, which sounds like together. Oh, I think I'm actually wrong on the notes. Ah, I'm up one step on the bass line, that's why. Okay, so synth line is actually a slightly different note progression. Synth line goes 1, 2. The bass line goes. I didn't realize I did them slightly off. I just recorded it with the wrong notes. But I think it works okay. It doesn't sound too dissonant. Yeah, it actually kind of harmonizes a little, which, again, not what I was intending to do. I just recorded the notes wrong, but that actually works. That's an unfortunate happy accident, I suppose. But for another complementing instrument to add to the mix here, I wonder, I was thinking about maybe a chorus line, like a chorus synth, but you have a couple different other options. So what are we thinking as far as something to, again, pair with the high? It doesn't need to be the same notes. It doesn't need to be the same type of instrument, but something that's going to kind of complement the track overall. I was also thinking maybe high strings too, like a really distinct synth string, different from the one that's on the bass line. And I see we got a stretch reminder from Sour Lad. Oh. Well, I tell you, because I have to do these jam streams standing up to be able to make funny mouth noises, and also because of my recording setup with the loop station, one thing I should have been doing up till now, which I wasn't, was putting in I have orthotics. I have terrible old man heels, but my regular street shoes have orthotics so that my heels don't get irritated. I have a house pair of shoes. Normally I don't wear shoes in my house, but I have a pair of workout shoes for indoor stuff. I put my orthotics in those, and now when I'm wearing them, my heels don't explode. So it's actually easier for me to do these jam streams now because my heels aren't dying, and I should have been doing that for the last 2 years, but I wasn't. I was essentially barefoot on carpet, which would be pretty painful after about 2 hours. So if I ever do like a subathon or endurance like jam stream, where this is an idea I've been kicking around, you folks can tell me if you think it would be fun, but kind of like a subathon endurance stream where I'm here with the loop and the synthesizer, or synthesizers really, and basically for as long as possible trying to just mess around and create songs and, you know, go for like an endurance thing. I don't know if you folks think that's something you'd be interested in seeing. I could think about that. I don't know how successful a subathon would be, but it sounds like a fun challenge. You know, I don't know if I could sit here and create functional music for like 5 hours straight, but I'm down to try. Iconic says something string, perhaps a soft ting sound or something. Okay, let's take a look at the synth instruments, and what I can do is I can play them in real time and we can see if something jumps out as far as something that we can pair with what we've got so far. And there's hundreds, literally hundreds of instruments on this particular synthesizer, and I've used a lot of them, but I haven't used every single one. So let's see. Okay, this should be audible. Again, you're gonna hear fuzz, but as we're moving through the instrument list, let's see if anything kind of jumps out. This is what's called voice lead. It sounds kind of like choir, chorus-y, but the higher up you go, it sounds more like a string instrument, which is interesting. There's this one, Stardust. Sounds kind of metallic, chimey. That could be an interesting compliment. Sorry, I'm not talking directly in the mic. That could be an interesting compliment with the stuff we have now. We have two empty tracks. We have 4 and 5 that we can stick other instruments and other sounds on that are going to pair with the 3 we've got so far. I kind of like the idea of a moving, simple, several note melody that's looping, maybe using a slight variation of the one so far so that it doesn't clash dramatically with it and whatnot. But even taking this chime one, and we could do a couple things to it too. We could add like a filter, which would sound like. I gotta turn that one off to be able to talk, but that one, it creates kind of like a distortion signal. I have used this effect on several tracks as well, so I need to be a little bit careful with how much I do. We could even keep it simple and then take and add a delay so that it's creating kind of a more bouncing effect, or even like a panning delay so the sound is moving around the audio channels, but it's not distorting it so that you're not getting like a completely different sound. So this is what panning delay on. And I don't know how audible that is on the stream because, again, the stream is set up to be mono. But in the actual recording, you can hear it bouncing between the left and right channels. So if you're wearing headphones or using like a surround sound system, it'll sound like the sound is kind of dancing around you physically. And it's not just hitting the same audio channel at the same time. The effect's not on. I can't talk when it's on, otherwise you'll hear my voice like ping-ponging everywhere. But let's try and pair that up and see what it sounds like. So to do this, I have to take my boosts off, record it, and then turn everything back on, which is fine. So let's try it. All right, let me turn everything back on. Make sure my EQ is set up properly. All right. So I think that does pair decently well. I got to mess with the audio mix a little bit. I think the part we added, I think it will complement the synth line before that, but I think it needs to be a little bit louder and the synth line needs to be a little bit softer. If they're both loud, they're going to compete. But if one is a little bit louder than the other, then it'll sound more complementary because the notes are almost identical. They're very similar. It's just the third synth, the first high one we did, is slower in rhythm essentially. And then the one we added is a repeating 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 ad nauseum forever. And so yeah, let's keep that. Let's save that update to it. And so what we're left with one more open track, which we don't necessarily have to fill. It doesn't have to be 5 full tracks each time. But I do like the idea of having all these different parts of the melodies and effects, essentially. What we could do, which I've done on a lot of the electronic type tracks, is add like a part B or some sort of melody line that would take the place of one of the other synths. Probably number 3. The first high. So it would be like a different melody that takes the place of this one, so that for like maybe the second half of the song, it's playing in that spot. Sarlet says, anyways, gotta bounce now. Bye everyone, have fun beatboxing. Alright, Sarlet, thanks for tuning in and hanging out today. Hope you have a good rest of your evening. And I will catch you later. So have a good one and take it easy, my dude. So let's take a look at the sound set here. That was Stardust that we used to create that kind of chimey one. And let's see if anything kind of jumps out as far as something that'd be a good counter melody or like a complementing part that we could swap in for the original high lead. So let's see. This one's called Bright. I don't remember what this one is. Oh, this one. Again, you get some fuzz. This particular sound, I need to bookmark. I talked about this during the release party for the recent albums on Far Future Days, the more electronic dance version. One type of music sound I really like, and folks that have been around a little bit can tell me if you remember this. In the early PlayStation 1 era of games, I know it was very common in a lot of Capcom games and a couple other ones I could think of, like the scrolling shooter Raystorm is another one. They had a synth in a lot of their melodies that sounded like this. And I don't know if it's got its own name or is a real common one elsewhere, but so many of the compositions at that time, whether they were like adventure or action games or RPGs, they really liked using that type of synth. And it's kind of distinct, and I've noticed it in a bunch of things. So I really like this one, and I've put it into several of the ones I've done so far. I'm trying to think which ones. I have one similar to this on at least one track on Days. I know that. But if we take the idea of chords, let's see. We could adapt this one. Again, it's called Bright. The synth set on this particular keyboard is called Bright. We could take this one and adapt it into something for this one. I don't need to use it on this track. I just wanted to point that I really like this sound. It reminds me of those old school PS1 era games. We could add chords to this one if we really wanted to. This is just a simple 2-note bass chord. And we could do something like that as just a, again, counter melody that's going to take the place of 3, and we're going to toggle them on and off for different parts of the song. So if we load up the beat, let me fiddle around with it here, and we'll see if it pairs. I just thought it was worth pointing out. I don't know if anybody else knows what I'm talking about when it comes to that music style, but it's something I remember from back in the day. All right, let's see. Okay, I thought I'd mess around with that just to see. I see Edward says the sound kind of clashes with the rest of the beat. I think so. I think you're right, Edward. I think it's too kind of, again, it's literally called bright. It's too kind of bright and upbeat sounding for a more kind of aggressively, like kind of dark and ominous type of beat. And so I almost wonder, and you folks could tell me what you think. I think that really simple chord progression, I messed around with like a whole step and then like a half step, just sing. I think I like the half step better, like half or one step down, like 3 up instead of 2 down. Anyway, I think that melody would work with a different instrument, or maybe kick down an octave so it's a little bit lower and closer to the kind of key as everything else. And it could be that we go from synths and we go to like strings too. At this point, I'm just going through the instrument set, trying to see what sounds interesting. So if we keep moving on up the list for synth, this is called analogon. Analogon. I don't know if that's short for something. That I've used in, I think it's Dawn Metropolis. That exact chord progression. It's a bit muted. I don't know if I really like the way that sounds. Keep going. This one's called Fargo. This is the one that has the kind of metallic resonant noise, I think. Yep. I do like this one too. I don't know if it really fits here though. Try and drop it way down a few registers. I do like how if you just hold the note down on this particular instrument, it's got a bit of kind of warble to it. It's got its own sort of distortion built in, which is kind of neat. It's got some resonance to it. I don't know if it really fits for the scheme of what we're pairing it with here. So let's keep moving. This one's called Fantasia. Kind of like the bright synth. This one is more kind of like fantastical, whimsical sounding. What I'd like to do after we finish up with this track is work on one for the potential RPG album next year. This is kind of from that same era of again, synth use that I was talking about in early PS1 era. You heard this effect used in RPG soundtracks as well, or this instrument rather. I put a pin, maybe we'll come back to that one. This one's called Bell Pad. It's like, as the name would suggest, like digital bells. Not really as metallic and echoey as some other ones. This one's called Xenon Pad. I don't know what that really reminds me of. It's almost kind of choir-like in a way. This would be good for like a slow, kind of melodic ballad-y type song, I think. If you're doing something with a lot of kind of long, flowing melody type themes to it, this one would be really good for that. Again, we're just briefly going through the entire list of synths here on the synthesizer. This one's called Equinox. Very stringy. That's not bad. I think we'd have to be focusing on the lower register. Could do like a double step melody as well. I'm kind of curious with the really fast drum and bass rhythm. I wonder if that would even pair. Let's try it. I think we'd have to do it fast. And I don't like that. I think that rhythm would be directly at odds with everything else on the song. Interesting idea though. This one's called Dark Moon. This one, different type of more like really, really electronic synth sound. That's actually not bad. Let's see if we can come up with something with this one. This is the one I think I used on Dawn Metropolis, this exact instrument. And now it's up here. That one's up here. I think it was this one. Anyway. Let's see if we can do something with this one. I like the way it sounds, but we might have to switch up how we're doing the melody. that second chord is off. Thought I'd try and pair it with the lower note, but I don't think that's the right harmonizing note. That has potential. I don't know if I'm 100% sold on it. The rhythm is slightly off. I just recorded it just so I could see how it matched up. I'd have to re-record it without the boost on because it's got the audio distortion on it. I think it's at odds with the bass line notes. Shame too, because I think it does have a functional purpose, but not when paired with the bass line. It's too dissonant, I think. And I don't know if I did something like this where I drop the bass out and then it's just the rhythm plus this synth line. I wonder if that's technically changing the key. It might be. It's a shame. I kind of like the way that instrument sounds. Let's delete that. That's not going to work. I could try and add some sustained notes that are maybe octave, but the same as maybe the third high synth. So it's not going to try and create like a completely different melody that's going to swap in and out. But I do like the way this instrument sounds. Could even mess with the step a little bit, but more or less keep the rhythm. So it's not going to be, again, a dramatic departure. It's going to be very similar. I think that's going to mesh well mesh better rather than trying to create something completely different, because everything I've tried has been at direct odds with one other component of the song, and I don't think it sounds very good. Oh, we could do something like that. That's not bad. In fact, that meshes a little bit better than what I just put together before and deleted. All right, let's try and record a placeholder and see if it works. This one in the mix a little bit more. This could be the part B, I think. 3 and 4 playing at the same time, I think would conflict a little bit with this one. But this could be a part B, so that these two drop out, then we have this combination of instruments for the second half. I'll have to think about that one. I have to re-record no matter what because it's got the distortion on it from the boosts. But that's definitely an option. Thinking about the way the track is constructed so far, we could leave it with just 4 parts to it. It's perfectly serviceable with like a part A and part B, taking what we've recorded so far. And so, think about that. In fact, I'll delete the 5th one for now. I don't want to leave it in the recording and forget to take it off later. But if we think about, before we move on, if we think about how this one is constructed and how it would be performed, maybe for this one it would be the bass line and the first synth line, or maybe even the fourth synth line, since that's kind of an unusual way to start. And then like maybe it goes. We have a couple repeats of this. And then the bass line comes in. And then we bring in the rhythm. You bring in the third synth. Or even we leave it with the 4th one, and then we do like a drop that brings in the 3rd one, so it sounds like something like this. And when the drop ends, it comes out back out, and then we drop in the 3rd synth. When we think about how we transition to the later part of the song, or it's more of an outro, I guess. And then maybe the complete fade out before it cuts off would be the last lingering bit of the interrupted synth, and then that's the last thing you hear before the whole thing repeats and starts over. So I think we could probably construct a good, like maybe part A and part B, messing around with when the high synths come in, and then adding maybe like a pseudo drop. Those are always tricky because I have to kind of remember how the loops repeat, because it's repeating, and then once you take it off, it keeps cycling the loop as if it never stopped. So it's a little bit tricky to make sure you're not like cutting off a section or starting or taking the drop part off before the next part starts at the top. Anyway, that's a problem for recording to work on. All right, let's save this. Name-wise, I know Iconic had mentioned up in the chat. Where was it? Satellite Strobe as a song title, which I think is kind of fitting because of the sort of beeping and rapid rhythms of the melodies. What are we thinking for Satellite Strobe? I think that's a pretty good name. Let me pull up my list while we're finishing this one up. What I'll do is I will add this to the list of stream tracks just so I have it captured. But I don't know if this one is going to go into what release this is going to go into. There's one thing I'm planning for the far off future, not immediate. Just like we did for this month when we had the electronic kind of techno-ish album release and then the more chill down tempo one. I do want to do future releases that are like higher energy electronic ones and chill ones. I probably won't do a combined release like that, at least not for that type of project. It is a considerable lift to get all that done and coordinate for two projects, but there will be another electronic type album in the future and then another more chill one. I've already started mapping out ideas for those. So this one may end up in the electronic release. It just depends. I'm going to be cutting off the BGM 3.0 release track list soon. That one might actually come out before the end of summer. We'll see. I got to go back and take a tally of how many I have and record them first. But there will be a BGM 3.0 collection coming out soon, which is going to primarily consist of songs that we've created on stream. There's a lot of them, and they go back for over a year. And so that'll be the next immediate release before Halloween. And I'm actively working on Halloween as well. But at some point after that, there will be other themed releases based around like musical style stuff we've seen before. So let's put this here. We will go with Iconic suggestion of Satellite Strobe for this one. And with that, we will move on to a new track. This will be probably the last one we do for today. But let me save everything on a new one. And before we completely get started, I'm going to go run to the little Raku's room and fry some chicken. But let me save. Here. And I think what I'll do, just so it's not dead silence while I'm gone, I will turn on, I've copied the track we just finished, Satellite Strobe, into a new file, and I'm going to clear it all off, and we're going to work with this one. But for now, I'm going to let everything loop so that there's a little bit of background noise, and I'll be back in 1 minute. realized something. I forgot that my mic source and the playback for whatever I'm looping is the same source, so it was just dead silence for like 4 minutes. Sorry about that. I should have turned my mic off and left the loop input on instead of muting the source in OBS. So it was just dead air for about a few minutes. My bad. Okay, let us proceed and work on the next BGM track. We're going to clear this one off. Let me double check and make sure. Okay. We're going to clear this one off and we're going to start from scratch. Now for this one is going to be different in style. This one I'd like to brainstorm some ideas for a track that's going to be part of, hopefully, the RPG soundtrack sequel. And I'm not at liberty to divulge any names or titles yet, but I want to do a battle theme. So if you remember back to the beginning of this year now, it's been that long already, I debuted The Lost Kingdom, which was a really big BGM project that was done in collaboration with Wazzy of Team Toxicure. And that was a really fun one, stepping outside of my realm of comfort and trying to design tracks that sounded like they'd be at home in a JRPG, like an old school SNES RPG type setting. I want to do a sequel project to that one. And that's going to be something for hopefully early 24. It's not going to be this year. I have to finish writing and recording everything for it. It's going to be probably about the same size. And I've already started recording tracks for it, so I'm not in pre-planning. But that one is going to take everything I learned in creating Lost Kingdom and try and level it up. Level up those things and create some more complex and some more interesting songs that are going to be in a similar style or genre. And so we need an RPG battle theme. It's probably going to be at least 3 or 4, more than the last one. I like the idea of having, regular enemy battles, regular enemy battle part 2, boss fight, rival fight, obviously final boss fight, or maybe decisive battle separate from final boss. So I'm thinking maybe around 4 or so, quote unquote, battle oriented themes. And I don't think I've recorded any yet. I've got a couple on the loop. I need to do a recording session coming up one of these days to capture a bunch of the stuff that's on there now. We're at track 27 or file 27 on the loop. So that means the first one is a holdover from the previous set that I've released. But that means there's essentially almost 30 tracks here that have been recorded. And then they'll be part of future releases. Iconic says I return, but I got to go now, sadly. Thanks for the fun, chill time. Hope you have a great rest of your day. All right, Iconic. Thank you for hanging out and joining us today. I will definitely catch you in the next stream. We should be back on Wednesday. I think Wednesday we're doing DMC 5, and Friday we're doing Street Fighter 6. You'd think I'd have my schedule committed memory, but I definitely don't. But I'll definitely catch you later, man. Have a good evening and take it easy. All right. So for this one, I think I'm going to follow a similar process before. Maybe I will go for a fully fleshed out series of things, and we'll come back, talk about the results, and maybe tweak and fine tune some stuff. So again, RPG battle theme, maybe something with a bit more of a driving force behind it. And we will see what happens. So I will turn off the boosts and we will jump back in and start putting together some ideas. All right, let's turn everything back on and reconvene here. So this one, again, focusing on the idea of going for a battle theme. This one has a little bit of an unusual rhythm to it compared to some of the other ones I've done, which are a little bit more kind of straightforward and rock, quote unquote, rock oriented for a battle theme. I wanted to try messing around with a little bit more of an irregular, this is a halftime rhythm. I don't know what you call that, but it's a bit more kind of offbeat in the style. I'll drop the level down a little bit so I can talk over it. And then kind of likewise, I went for a little bit more of an unusual bass line. I don't think I have a track that kind of sounds like this, at least for the RPG release. There's one that does something similar with the bass line, but it's not this fast. I think it's a lot slower. What I may end up doing, which I've done on previous projects, is I'll record all the tracks that I have on the loop that I'm going to be assigning to releases, and then maybe put, anywhere between 20 and 30 in the track folder. And then as I map out what I'm going to call them and whatnot, I will pick and choose and eliminate ones until I get enough for the release. And so I usually record more than I need to give myself some time to kind of marinate on them and think. And sometimes I end up kicking some out and moving them into some other project, or just flat out not using because I don't like them once everything's been recorded. So I'll end up most likely doing for this one is recording like 10 different battle themes for the different sort of moods and styles, and then narrowing it down to like 5 for the release itself. And then I'll repurpose them into some other project. So if we look at what we have here, and I don't know how much I'm going to keep with this one. I deleted off that 4th track with the string part. I would like to have strings on here, but not the way I set them up. I think it's a little bit abstract. But if we bring in the bass line, so kind of different from other battle theme tracks that I did in the previous release, things like Rivals Clash or War of Waves. This one's more bouncy. It's not necessarily an upbeat, like happy type sound per se, but it's the rhythm and energy level. It's more kind of driven in the way it bounces around a little bit, which is what I was going for this one. I wanted to have kind of more of a noteworthy bass line that's not just a couple notes, going up or down or whatnot. I wanted to have a little bit more rhythm to the bass line, which is how we got the one here. And then if we add in the 3rd track, kind of taking a book from, I want to say Breath of Fire 3 on PlayStation 1. They did a lot of kind of jazzy instrumentation incorporated with the RPG themes, like a lot of brass and kind of saxophone-ish type stuff, which I really like. It's a fantastic soundtrack, considering I haven't beaten the game, but I know a lot about its music. And so this one is definitely taking a page from like Breath of Fire 3's handbook for construction. So the third track, which is the quote unquote saxophone line, it's got a couple different saxophones. One was like a bass clarinet to start, and then I went back and added a tenor, alto or tenor. And so this one plays with the same melody as the bass line. It just steps up a little bit. And I think what this one is going to need, maybe not in today's session, but as I develop this one a little more, it's going to need a complementing higher end melody. I think I was trying to fill around with string runs, maybe a flute or something maybe more sharp like an oboe or clarinet. I haven't quite decided in my brain, but there's going to be another component that needs to be paired with this. And so the 5th track on the loop that comes in is this piano. It's like a kind of chime synth-ish run that kind of complements the two melodies that we've got, the bass line and the main synth. And this one comes in and out. It's not constant. I tried looping it where it's constantly going, but I think it gets a little bit repetitive. Instead, it comes in once and then waits a few measures to come back in again. I think I'd probably drop this one low in the mix. I have everything sort of baselined here as it's playing back so people can hear it. But in the final, I'd probably take this part and make it a little bit more in the background so it's not prominent, but you can hear it coming in and out every few measures. And so I'm thinking for this particular theme, what it's most likely going to do is have a couple different notable sections where parts of the instrumentation is going to drop out. Maybe like, I don't know if I'd want to drop bass completely. Maybe we go bass and synth line melody. And then maybe empty rhythm section with just the beat. And then we bring in everything bit by bit. We could do something like that where, let's say we're just working with these 4, we don't add a 5th. But we have these 4 tracks, and then we play around with how many of them are playing at one point, as we have kind of like a part A, part B, and part C. And then as we get ready to outro towards the end of the track, we limit it back down to just the beat and the bass line. And maybe we end on bass line for this one. And we have it cut off abruptly there, and then it repeats and goes back to the top of the track and starts over from the beginning. I think this one has potential. I'll have to see how it stacks up against the other battle themes. I know there's at least one other one. I just don't remember where it is on this loop. Otherwise, I'd show it off here for comparison. But I think we'll keep that one for now. I'll probably tweak it a little bit. A lot of these aren't finalized, so I'll actually sit down and start recording. But I think it's a good start. Maybe about 70% complete to what I'm looking for in the track. But I think that's a good stopping point. We could do another one, but I do need to take care of some stuff before it gets too late. So we will call that a stream for today. Let me go and take a look at my list. We should definitely raid somebody. Let me see who's on the homie list. There are not a lot of people online. I see some of the bigger folks I know that have a ton of people online right now, but I don't see any of the smaller ones that I know, which that's fine. We don't have to raid someone if it's just the, really large ones. They probably wouldn't even notice if I raided them. But that's okay. We could still close everything out and go to outro. There it goes. All right. And so that'll do it for today's session. I think we definitely covered a lot of good ground when it came to talking about beatbox technique. Hopefully people found that helpful. We'll be back on Wednesday again. I think based on my schedule I posted, it's DMC on Wednesday and then Street Fighter Friday. So with that said, I will bid you all good evening. Hope everyone has a good rest of your night, and I will catch you folks in the next stream.